Alrighty, hello again, everyone, and welcome to it, the Daily Caller podcast, the Friday video edition for this, the second day of November 2018. We are just a few short days away from the midterm elections, and our long national nightmare of an unending slew of campaign commercials is about to come to an end. On Friday, as we always do, we take somebody from their normal life and suck them into our miserable existence. And today, we didn't have to suck very far or very hard. We've got Vince Coglianese, Editorial Director of the Daily Caller here. I grabbed him in a headlock and threw him in the chair. Welcome to the show, Vince.
I'm so grateful to be 17 feet down the hallway.
Hey, I've seen you with your door closed in your little nap time. So
yeah. Well,
let's not pretend that this isn't work for you. I want to talk to you about for those of you who don't know, Vince also co-hosts Mornings on the Mall here on WMAL in Washington, D.C. You can get it online at WMAL.com.
Yes.
My wife is executive producer, so it keeps us in gravy too. So otherwise, I wouldn't give a damn what he does.
Right. So we're going to feign like we like each other.
That's right.
For the rest of the show.
Let's talk about the elections. We're just a few days out, and polling is all over the place. Polling is intense. First of all, let me ask you, as somebody in the media and somebody who talks about the news for a living, do you find polling useful, or is it news, or is it created news?
It depends on how the questions are structured, right? So when you see a poll and a survey result that shocks you, especially on sentiment, then you really should look at how the questions were asked, and it will give you a much clearer answer of how they got there, right? So immigration's famous for this. Immigration questions, you can never quite tell what comprehensive immigration reform.
A lot of time, depending on how the question is worded,
yes, exactly.
You don't want to say, "God, get them all out of the country," because then you think, well,
right.
the person asking the question is going to think I'm a Klansman or something.
Yes, the way abortion questions are worded, this happens all the time. Pro-life, pro-choice, do you support choices for women, etc. All of that changes dynamics entirely. So sentiment polling, I think, is a kabuki theater in terms of just figuring out what people actually think about issues. Anyway, that's on the issue of actual political polling. They're helpful guideposts. It's true. I think conservatives kind of overstate the extent to which the 2016 election was wrongly surveyed entirely. I mean,
it was wrongly surveyed.
Well,
or prognosticated on based on the surveys.
Right. I think that's the key distinction, is that the prognostication that was predicated on what those surveys yielded was wrong. It was clearly wrong. When you had the New York Times saying that 97% chance that Hillary Clinton was going to be elected president.
Yeah.
I mean, I imagine somewhere in the New York Times political department where they decide these things, they're thinking to themselves, well, we got it right because we did say there was a 3% chance that Donald Trump would become president.
They all kind of, as I wrote about this in my book, they all kind of did a mea culpa at the end, and they did the soul-searching moment, but I don't know that anything's changed.
No, nothing.
Let me ask you this. Donald Trump brought people out to vote who hadn't voted in a while, who were disgusted with politics in general. And I think everybody's kind of disgusted with politics in general, but they said, I'm washing my hands of it. They came back for him. Does the Trump phenomenon, was it transmittable?
Well, so long as people continue to pay attention to the people who voted for Donald Trump, yes, it is transferable. Because the Democratic Party is no safe harbor for that voter. So the Republicans can have that voter if they want it. Or the Democrats could steal it even from Republicans if they thought to themselves, you know what, I should speak to a middle class that is frustrated by Washington, who feels like they've gotten bad deals from Washington, who hasn't represented their interests whatsoever, and has considered their interests to be subordinate to whatever liberal policy agenda they're looking to advance. So it's all the globalist versus nationalist stuff, that means something sincerely to Trump's base. They hear that and they say to themselves, well, God, why does it take so long for a politician to express that Americans should come first? That seems like a really basic proposition. Yeah, why is it controversial at all? And the only reason it's controversial is because the press is an appendage of the Democratic Party, as you well know, and you've written extensively about. It's not actually about any particular ideology. It's really about serving a power interest, which is disappointing.
Do you think that'll change? We've witnessed a gutting of the audience for the mainstream media. We've witnessed layoffs in newspapers across the country. The industry is imploding.
Right.
Yet there seems to be a digging in of the heels of, yes, what we've done and what we've been doing is causing us to shrink and maybe go out of business.
Yes.
but damn it, we're going to keep doing it, and sooner or later it will work? Or do you think there comes a point where I don't want them to be conservative media? I want them to just either be honest about their liberal bias, or go back to some semblance of real journalism, objective journalism, where I think Twitter is a big problem for them. But do you think that they'll ever get it, or will it be too late before they get it?
So I've a couple of views on this. That I think a lot of people romanticize what journalism used to be like.
Right, but it was better.
Because we didn't know better, though. I think that's part of it. Like, you look back at, like, a Murrow or a Cronkite, and you think to yourself, man, those were the good old days where they could just tell us the news and we could believe it. Well, yeah, but there weren't, like, 1,000 news outlets who could potentially expose to you how fraudulent their selection
what
bias
they used to
was.
do was just, they had the power to ignore. If when you had 3 sources for news, they just said, well, this isn't interesting, or this doesn't matter, or I don't want people to know about this story. And there was no way for that water. It was a dam. Now we've got tributaries through the internet, through media, where that information gets around that dam.
That's true. So with outlets like the Daily Caller, we're circumventing that problem. We're adding to the sum total of available knowledge in the world, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing for America. But the news industry has also changed in terms of profitability. You talk about those guys; they could print money hand over fist. They had much bigger audiences than any news outlet today could ever imagine or dream to. So now what do you have? You have news outlets that struggle to get by, who, if you actually are focused on making a profit, you fight for every penny you can get. How do you fight for it? Sensational news coverage, with coverage that reaches to the lowest common denominators. There's way too much of that out there, and it's not, in the end, edifying for America. The flip side of it is the companies that are huge, the ones that wield so much influence, on cable, they're making money still. But beyond that, you think about the major newspapers in the country, the New York Times, the Washington Post. Increasingly, the major news organs of the United States are vanity projects for billionaires.
Yeah.
They're basically, you got Carlos Slim owns the New York Times, a Mexican billionaire. You've got Jeff Bezos, who owns the Washington Post.
Who bought it with the change he found in his couch.
Right.
Like $250 million, there you go.
If he thought that was a great investment, Amazon would have bought the Washington Post. Jeff Bezos bought it personally.
Right.
This is Bezos money that's in the Washington Post. In other words, he hopes it succeeds. If he doesn't, no sweat off his back. And
he makes more money in a given day than he paid for the Post, essentially. Totally. If the stock does well, the guy's worth $150 billion, for God's sake.
Yes, so I think all of that leads to a need for, which has always been there, but now you have the opportunity to do it, a more educated news consumer, a more discerning news consumer, someone who can look at the news and realize, okay, I may not be getting the whole story here, and I've got to do a little more digging in order to get it, or you figure out who you can trust, who can help be your Sherpa through the news cycle, who can be the person you can look to and say, you know what, I can trust their interpretation
I'm
of the
sitting
news.
right here, Vince. You can just flat out say
Well,
it. It's a little embarrassing.
It's the whole point. It's the whole reason. Look, it's one of the reasons the Daily Caller exists at all. 2, it's one of the reasons your show exists at all. The whole point is to help people navigate through a very dense news environment, one in which a whole bunch of people, for their own sick, disgusting, partisan, selfish interests, are trying to lie to you. And they need somebody to guide them through it. And you do a good job of that. And for that reason, people should not only listen to something like this, but definitely share it in your case.
All right, well, then we're done.
All right, good.
Let's talk about some of the races here, because we've got the House is what's really in play. The Senate actually looks like Republicans could pick up seat.
Right.
In a bit of weird irony, lose the House of Representatives. We have Nancy Pelosi going on Stephen Colbert's show the other day saying that, well, we'll worry about it, the tone of our rhetoric after we win. And
right.
Maybe then we'll pump the brakes on calling everybody Nazis. There is a fairly good chance that Republicans lose the House, not based on economics. God knows the economy is booming, and if it were an economics election, the Republicans would pick up seats. Do you think which do you think matters more to the electorate? The economy, or are they taking it for granted, and is it the Trump tweets, the personality stuff, the reality TV aspect of our politics nowadays? Because when things are going well, you have the ability to take for granted that things are
Precisely.
going well. The one last thing, I know
Sure.
I'm blabbling on here, but it is my show.
It is.
You have the tax cuts. Republicans thought this is going to be great. The $1,000 bonuses people were getting at the beginning of the year, everybody's like, this is going to be a great boon
Right.
to Republicans. But that has already been baked into the cake. People are now, they were grateful in February when their checks increased, their take-home pay increased. Now they're kind of used to it. Elections are never about rewarding somebody who did something for you in the past as much as they are, what are you going to do for me next?
You've nailed it. I mean, that is the principle I think that is at work here. So, first of all, there's a cross section of the audience or the electorate that fits into each category. But the person who's going to be grateful to the president, probably people who are listening to this or watching this right now, the person who's going to be grateful to the president for the tax cuts is probably highly likely to vote anyway.
Right.
So the question is, on the margins, how do you increase turnout? And that margin is done through people who are upset at someone or something that they think needs to be corrected by use of their vote. Their vote is a punishment for what they see is going wrong. So when I look at just a couple days out now from the election, the biggest drivers for why people are actually showing up to the polls on the Democratic side is because they don't like Trump's temperament. They interpret Trump maybe through the lens of CNN or MSNBC, or certainly through their own interpretation that temperamentally he's wrong, we expect more of a president, he needs to have a better tone, all those things. On the Republican side, I don't see Republicans, meaning elected Republicans, driving conservative voters to the polls. I see elected Democrats driving conservatives to the polls. I think that it's almost a counterforce.
It's a motivated vote against.
Precisely, and that's why I think in the waning days of the election, you see this desperate attempt by both the Democrats and their aiders and abettors in the mainstream press to ignore immigration. Mm-hmm. They want to ignore it outright.
Or they dismiss the caravan as no big deal.
The caravan's nothing. The caravan's not a big deal. A couple thousand people headed our way. Whatever. It's not even going to be here for 2 months is what you hear. It's not an invasion. By the time they get here, they'll be so small anyway, you won't even notice it. Here's the lie. That's the lie. The truth is that last month, according to the Border Patrol, we've never had more people crossing the border, family members crossing and captured by the Border Patrol than we did last month. This invasion is happening every day. Right. That caravan we keep talking about is merely a symbol. It's an avatar for a much bigger problem, which is we have constant illegal immigration that needs to be resolved. And there's not a single Democrat in the country who could look at you with a straight face, unless they're just flat-out open borders anarchists, who could look at you with a straight face and tell you this is a fair system. It's not, and they don't want to actually address it because they know voters can so easily see through this that they'll support Republicans because they think Democrats have it completely wrong.
It always kind of cracks me up when they talk about, well, the system is broken. The system is broken. No, the system is broken in many ways because it's not being enforced. Parts of it are not being enforced. Parts of it are being ignored. If you never change your oil in your car, but you make sure to change the transmission fluid and the antifreeze, your engine isn't broke. It's your fault. Your engine didn't break.
Right.
You killed it.
Right.
You look at the immigration system and you say, well, we're not going to, sanctuary cities are okay. We're not going to really deport anybody as long as they're good people. Then the system breaks down. If part of it breaks down, the entire system breaks down. But do you really think in an election where the economy is booming and Democrats are trying to scare the hell out of people and then telling people that immigration is no big deal, do you think that immigration is a big enough motivator for people to go out and vote? Or is this, I'm going to vote anyway, but I'm really looking forward to voting because of immigration? Is this new people, or is this sort of a...
It's a good question.
Churning up old people?
I think there must be a mix of both. One of the reasons why I think immigration is important when I look at it as an electoral issue is how desperately Democrats don't want to talk about it.
I know.
So when I see Democrats doing that, running away from it...
You can tell they don't want to talk about it when their knee-jerk reaction is to call anybody who does talk about it a racist.
Or...
Because they want to shut down the conversation.
Or when the president this week brings up the idea that birthright citizenship, by its very nature, this idea that we could have illegal immigrants come into the country, give birth to the tune of 300,000 people a year, becoming U.S. citizens by virtue of the land that they were born on, then that's a problem. And when you see Democrats come out, and not just Democrats, but the media, Chuck Todd did it this week. Basically, don't let that distract you. The president is doing this in the red zone of the election, says Chuck Todd. Who is Chuck Todd to tell us that we should be ignoring the president of the United States?
He's a former staffer for Tom Harkin's presidential bid in 1992. That's who Chuck Todd is.
Well, precisely. So the idea is that it's a bunch of Democratic operatives telling us pay no attention to this dramatic issue because it's really inconvenient to the goal, which I hope for next week.
That's what I find most annoying about the media is them telling you what you should care about,
Yes.
rather than just telling you what's going on, and then you decide as a sentient human being what to care
Exactly.
about and what not to care about. But I care
Amen.
about the elections coming up. Now, shifting focus to that, do you think Republicans lose the House?
As of this moment,
Right now?
on Friday, I do. I think they lose the House.
A
But
lot,
that
by
could
a lot,
change.
by a
No, I
little?
don't. I mean, but here, this is derivative wisdom because I'm not going to pretend like I'm watching every single district in
Right.
the country really closely.
The people on TV who act like they do aren't either.
and that's true. I know a bunch of people
All
like
you have
that.
to do is speak confidently on television, and it doesn't matter whether you know what you're talking about or not.
So for that reason, I've talked to a couple people that I do kind of trust on this because I think that are smart and have looked closely at it. And it seems to me that at this moment that Democrats could have like a 5-seat majority in the House. I mean, we're talking like a hair's breadth away in terms of how close this is. So, of course, I could be completely wrong, and I'm totally okay with that I'd be completely wrong come Election Day. But that's where I think things change. I think in the Senate, you see Republicans pick up seats and further.
I want to
argue
get
the
into
majority.
individual races in a second in the Senate, but I want to say in the House races, if you're kind of like, I don't really care, I'm not going to go vote because those
man.
Republicans are terrible or whatever, think of it this way. If you think Democrats have been insane and fun to watch, like a man smearing feces all over himself in an intersection, now imagine if they don't gain control of the House of Representatives, how they're going to be starting next Tuesday night. If you thought the Javits Center was fun to watch,
Well,
that'll be a motivation enough for you to go
No,
vote.
but here we have a mutual friend, Mark Levin, who's actually who's talked about this very issue. And Levin, for years, has been really keen on. I've got to support the guy who represents my values. I want to go for the conservative. He's ripping that script up this year. That's not what it's about.
I heard him yesterday.
That's not what it's about to him. I think he's in Barbara Comstock's
Keeping
district.
them out. Yeah,
He's in Barbara
Comstock
Comstock's
isn't that
district
conservative. I've
in
known
Virginia
Barbara for years.
And that's the 10th district. That district, that's a tough race. Comstock looks like she could very well lose this thing. Levin is voting for her. He doesn't like Comstock. He's not particularly for her. You know what he's for? He's for the president. And he's for seeing the president's agenda continue at pace for fear that it will be debilitated entirely by a Democratic House, which is going to seek only to destroy the president over
If
the
the
next
Democrats do regain control, it'll be interesting to see who they blame the government shutdown on, because there definitely will be a government shutdown.
I have a question for you, if I can flip this. I wonder the chance of cooling the country down, cooling the temperature down in the country, based only on the House. So I'm just going to consider the Senate to be the Republicans. Which direction do Democrats begin cooling off in? If they lose the House or if they win the House?
Normal humans, I think, would be that if they lost the House, because then if you keep losing, especially in a year when the first midterm and a new presidency, you have the historical advantage, and if it doesn't come to pass, you think some self-reflection would be in order.
Right. So you would be chastened by that.
You would think that,
Right.
but under this government, under these Democrats and the way the party is, I think they'd be worse. I think they'd be empowered. I think that they would look at their harsh rhetoric as why they won the House. Their ridiculous tones that chase them out, let them know they're not welcome anymore, anywhere, Maxine Waters sort of mentality. They said, well, it worked. Therefore, if we double down on it in 2020, it'll work even more. So I don't think that there'll be any self-reflection. I think there'll be self-congratulations and a total misinterpretation of why they won if they won.
In other words, if Democrats win the House, that ratifies their bad behavior and they decide we're going to keep doing this. If they lose the House, are they chastened? Do they have self-reflection?
I don't think they do.
Or do they become
Normal
more
people
hysterical?
Would. But I think that by nature, a liberal out of power is crazier than anything.
Okay. I wonder, I kind of feel like they would be more...
But rationally...
If there's a chance they'll be chastened, it'll be by losing.
Rationally, that would be the way it would go.
Yeah.
But we're not dealing with rational people because rational people wouldn't compare the President of the United States, any President of the United States, to Adolf Hitler in a very earnest way and repeatedly, while saying those guys are spreading hate. You're calling them history's greatest monster, but they're the ones spreading hate. You know, they're not self-aware. It's not what they're dealing with here.
Gotcha.
Okay, quickly to the Senate here. It looks like Heidi Heitkamp is done in North Dakota. That's a foregone conclusion. But a couple of other races that I want to talk to you about. Out in Arizona, we have a situation where we've got the first female fighter pilot
Right.
running,
McSally.
running against a pink tutu anti-war protester. You can go and fight for the Taliban for all I care, sort of liberal.
Totally
who has
deranged.
reinvented herself.
Yes.
Kirsten Sinema.
Yes.
Yet polls show that it's tied. It's a statistical tie, 46-46. What happened to? It's not even what do you think is going to win. What happened to Arizona? Arizona was a solidly red state.
Oh, well, I can't diagnose it beyond looking at the two senators who've most recently been in Arizona. I mean, John McCain and Jeff Flake should offer, I think, no confidence.
They both ran as conservatives, and they governed as something else, though.
Yeah, but again, they continued to appeal to that voter. John McCain kept getting reelected under those circumstances. So I think Arizona is a bit more complicated than just a flatly red state. I mean, but Kristen Sinema, forget politics for a second. Kristen Sinema has spoken so poorly of her own state and its people.
The meth lab of democracy, the Lindsay Lohan of states.
If she wins, just tack that on to like Trump's victory in the end, because even though they're totally different people, but there's no such thing as a political gaffe anymore.
No.
If Kristen Sinema wins in Arizona, having insulted the meth lab of democracy
many
Arizona
times
over and over, gaffes are over. Forget gaffe journalism. We should just not cover mistakes anymore.
Well, no. Republicans will still be covered.
Right.
Republicans will still not be able to make a verbal gaffe.
This is Joe Donnelly in Indiana this week.
I played that audio on the show.
It's
How
the
do you
best.
sit there? I get.
He's like, I have an Indian American staffer, but he does a great job.
I could get you could do that one time as just speaking stream of consciousness during a debate, but then to follow it up and say, and my state director, he's a black guy too, but he does a good job. He does a better job than you think. And I was like, what the hell?
I know.
And nothing about crickets in the mainstream media.
Well, the press is dishonest and partisan. I mean, I don't know how many times we could say this. It's funny because a couple years ago, you imagine, like, I would watch, like, pre-Trump campaign. You could watch CNN and be like, oh, yeah, you can detect the bias in this segment because they chose to talk about this issue rather than this issue. You don't even have to unmute CNN now.
No.
To realize.
Chiron across the bottom.
To realize.
Donald Trump refuses to admit that he basically sent those bombs.
To realize how partisan he is. Donald Trump continues racist tirade or whatever. It's like, it's all subjective now. And they don't care. In fact, I saw a survey this week. I think it was Emerson did this survey. Somebody. More Democratic voters watching CNN than MSNBC.
It wasn't that long ago, Vince, where the Fox was the conservative, MSNBC was the liberal, and CNN earnestly declared itself to be down the middle.
Yes, they were radically centrist. That's what, or at least they pretended
quite
to be.
proud of it.
Yeah.
And there's still people like Brian Stelter who believe that, or at least try to
don't
sell it.
believe it.
Let's talk about Florida there, because they have two important races down there for governor and for Senate. Bill Nelson been in the Senate for a very long time. The popular Governor Rick Scott is running against him. Florida's economy is doing well. By all rights, this should be Scott's to lose, but it's, again, tied or Nelson slightly ahead. DeSantis, the former congressman, Republican in Florida, is running against Andrew Gillum,
Right.
who is an avowed socialist, who's an acolyte of Bernie Sanders in reliably red Florida, or mostly reliably red Florida. And polls show him up by as many as 6 points.
Gillum, you mean?
Yes,
Yeah.
Gillum up.
Yeah.
What in the hell is going on in Florida?
That's a long-standing question. I think that's.
Well, no, you just Google Florida man, and if you got a few hours to kill, you can.
We
find
could
some
actually.
really
I
funny
think we
stories.
could. Richie, can we make a graphic called "What the hell is going on in Florida"? Because I'm pretty sure we could always use it.
Yes.
No, it's.
It'll be a guy wrestling and eating an alligator at the same time.
Again, I think America. I think what's happened is, by and large, is that Americans have become so fed up with the customary politics of our country that they're willing to entertain the most extreme ideas they can possibly conjure up. And that includes supporting a socialist type guy like an Andrew Gillum, a guy whose office is under FBI investigation. I mean, again, there's nothing left. The gaffes are gone.
But
and essentially what you have is Americans who are looking to basically say, you know what, I'm going to be open-minded about this. I just want to support anything that seems like somebody who actually cares about me. And Gillum is attempting to do that.
But
I do think there's some of that is trying to punish Trump.
I can understand turning towards a radical left-wing, give us them, take from, it's their fault. sort of bitter, anger, jealousy-based politics when things aren't going well. During the Great Depression, while you've got the Rockefellers lighting cigars with $100 bills and 20% unemployment, I can understand the resentment of the 20% unemployed towards somebody who's lighting cigars with a $100 bill. Things are going pretty well right now. We have more job openings than we have people able to fill them. If you want a job, you can find a job. You might have to move, you might have to commute, whatever, but you can find a job. That's what's so puzzling about it. Capitalism is actually working. Wages went up the most they've gone up in a decade this last quarter, and we've still got people turning towards socialism.
But you're thinking about it from the perspective of how will voters reward Republicans for the state of the economy. And the truth is, the cross-section that we're already going to be destined to vote.
But it's not even reward. It's turn away from people who are telling you, you think you've got it good, but it sucks, and here's why. And believing them. Somebody trying to convince you that your life is terrible when you're relatively happy.
Yeah, but if somebody keeps coming along, and says, hey, it could be better, and I could give you something more, I could give you universal health care, I could give you, in-state, I could give you free college, I could give you these things, eventually, right, it gets to the point where you're like, oh, that sounds kind of interesting, yeah, I want that. And I don't think everybody, despite the fact you do, and I do, and our listeners do, not everybody internalizes who's going to pay for that thing.
Yeah.
Like, in the end, we're just going to come back and bite us in the ass. We're going to pay for everybody else's benefits.
I get it if things are bad. If you're starving to death, if you're worried about where your next meal is going to come from, then yes, I get falling victim to the blame somebody else society.
This is why, the President Trump this week released a new campaign ad on his Twitter account, and I thought it was brilliant. It was very simple. It was like, this is what you get if you vote for Republicans. And it showed finance report after finance report after finance report, booming economy, low unemployment, everybody's doing better, wages are increasing, all of the highlights. And then the cinematic dark music begins. And this is what you get if you vote for Democrats. That was the president's case. And it's mobs in the street, people clawing at the door of the Supreme Court, Maxine Waters coming out and saying to get into their face. You have Hillary Clinton saying it's time not to be civil anymore. This is the jobs versus mobs campaign line that the president's used. And to your point, I think he thinks that'll be a successful tact. I think he thinks in the end, Americans are going to have enough of a sense when they go to the polls that they remember that and you're like, you know what? Trump's right. I should vote his way.
We shall see. And that's the beauty of prognostication. We'll all forget that we screwed this up anyway. Whenever it happens. That's almost all the time we have today. I want to thank Vince Coglianese for coming in. Thank you for listening and watching. And now I'm going to draw two names from our bucket of names here to see who wins first. The signed copy of Sebastian Gorka's book we had left over. And the winner of that book is going to be Yuri Juranek, which I'm probably bastardizing, but Yuri, congratulations. You just won a signed copy of Sebastian Gorka's book. And now for the signed softcover of David Limbaugh's The Great Destroyer. That one goes to Doug Johnson. A couple of dudes this week, I believe. I don't actually know. Maybe a woman is named Doug. Could be. My dad's name is Doug. He's not a woman. Anyway, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to everything the Daily Caller offers you, including and especially this podcast. We'll be back with